And welcome back. Last time we had talked a little bit about using things like value and contrast in order to bring alive our images to really give them some depth and dimension. Today we're going to discuss a little bit with color because eventually obviously we will be working with color images. So the first thing that we want to talk about though is a little bit of color theory. We're not going to go too in-depth in it, just give you a little bit of basics. In here we have, for example, a color wheel. Now, the big thing you need to know about the color wheel is that things that are here on the left side of the color wheel are considered to be your cool colors, whereas the things on the right side of this color wheel are considered to be your warm colors. Additionally, if you want good contrast between your colors, you look for colors that are opposite of the color you have. For example, if I'm looking at red, green is the best contrast to go with that. If I go with, for example, more of a purple, then yellow will be the color to best contrast that. Now that does not mean when you're creating an image you cannot use adjacent colors. For example, if you use yellow and green because you're trying to maybe portray something in nature, you can still do that. That's just what's called monochromatic. But again, this is just different ways that we can use to help brighten our image to give it different contrast. Now let's look at that with an example. Let's go ahead and create a new image. We're going to do the same thing as before. We're going to do 30 by 30. And let's go ahead and set it to no artboard and white. Now I'm going to go ahead and zoom that in just a little bit like we did before. And I'm going to use the pencil tool, but this time I'm going to increase my brush size. Because before, if you remember, our brush size was set to that of a single pixel. But I'm actually going to use the right bracket this time and increase that just to kind of speed things up here a little bit. All right, now if you look, when I just click, it's a black image, but let's go ahead and choose something a little bit more colorful. For example, let's choose something maybe a little bit more purple today. All right, and now of course I have placed a purple color. Now if I wanted to go ahead and add in some different color pieces to this, so for example, if I move this to be more upward, this is moving it more warm. And a lot of times we'll use warmer colors to represent things that are, like for example, in the sunlight versus like shadows. So I'm going to go ahead and paint in this bit here. Go ahead and just add that in. There's just a little bit of warmth being added into this image. And then let's go ahead and do our shadowing. And for that, I'm going to move more in the blue direction because again, that's going to give me some of those darker shades that I'm looking for. I might take it just a little bit more. And that I'm going to do maybe here along the bottom of the image, just to give it some cooling effect here. Be careful not to color outside the image though. All right, and of course, if we wanted maybe a highlight up here, kind of like before, where we added that little sparkle, if I move back in that warm direction, I can also increase going upwards as well into this direction to add even more of that luminosity and contrast that we had before. All right, and so we have created now a very simple image showing some contrast with colors. If I wanted to, of course, look at the color wheel, for example, and if I want to know what is my base color, I can use right here the eyedropper tool. It's a color picker, so if I just click on this, it automatically selects that color that I had originally, and we can see we have kind of a purplish hue. If I want something that contrasts well with purple, I'm going to look across the wheel, and it's more of a yellowish color. So if I want something that's going to contrast with that nicely, I can come right down here to the yellows. Click OK. And let's go ahead and go back to our pencil tool. And what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to use the fill bucket tool to fill that background in. And you can see that now we have filled in this background and it contrasts. It may not look the most visually appealing because maybe we want a different yellow that we want to use, for example. So we may go a little bit further one way or another in the color wheel to get that kind of effect. Or we could even say, let's use our pencil tool. And maybe we're going to use that to add a little bit of border to this. we're going to say this object here has a little bit of border with that. And you can see how that stands out against this object here. And just for kicks, let's go ahead and add a shadow in like we did last time. I'm going to go ahead back to the purple side of things. And I'm going to go a little bit darker still. And I'm going to actually bring that down. And now let's go ahead and add in our shadow, much as we did before. All right, and there we go. We have used colors in order to help add some contrast. So this is just a little bit of color theory, just to kind of help give you a couple things before we actually dive into making sprites. A little bit of background knowledge to help make your sprites look more dynamic and colorful. And if I zoom this sprite out now, you can see how those colors are starting to blend and how these edges, for example, stand out. Now, one thing I could do to try and make that look a little bit nicer, if I go back to my color picker and go back to using this color, remember how before we did not color these edges in here. We left those open. This is one thing I can do to try and make that image perhaps just look a little bit nicer so it doesn't look so blocky from afar. So now when I zoom out, we have our ball.